Hey guys, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about finding the site. Things that we've learned from trying to find sites many times around the world is the most important thing is to really come up with a plan beforehand, because once you get underwater, it's hard to communicate a lot of times. And so whatever you can do in terms of identifying the site or coming up with ways to find the plot prior to getting in the water. So for us, a lot of times what we do is we install permanent stakes into the reef. And so we hope that coming back the second time that we'll have those stakes still there. And so we set it up in a grid pattern that we have one stake on the left and one stake on the right running through the center of the transect. But you can use a variety of different tools. We have other colleagues who have one larger stake that they use, and then they use a GPS position. But you can think through it depending on your application. But again, you can't always rely on the stake to be there. And so it's always important on your first survey to make sure that you've recorded the GPS location as best you can. And so again, either swimming over the top or having it attached to some type of a float, and then swimming over the top of that location that you want to mark within the plot. Making sure that your GPS has been on for a long enough time so it's acquired the satellites and you have the least amount of error. These are things that will kind of set you up for success in the future. And those are the things that I kind of recommend that you do to find the second site or second time point. Once you're kind of thinking about going to the sites, we found it really handy to use the metadata from the previous survey effort. So if you can have either a roadmap, which is basically a 2D reconstruction of the plot itself from the previous survey effort, and then you record the depths and locations of where you have your markers. In particular, you want to record the location of where you have the stakes that you installed or the permanent markers, whether you identified in a coral head, a rock, some type of substrate where you can find it. And then also it helps you identify features. Again, if you're returning after 2 or 3 years, a lot of those features that you guys have learned and experienced from your efforts can be gone or removed. And so you have to be prepared that your roadmap or your metadata sheet could be completely different from what you initially surveyed. But it does help when you're getting in the water, and if there's a large massive coral or something that you recognize from the previous time, that really helps orient you where you are. The other thing I would add is the depths. Obviously, if you have tide fluctuations, that can play a factor, but it does really help if you know that your center line is in about 10 meters of water. You can basically swim along the 10-meter isobath, and that should help you find those features and limit your search pattern for finding those sites. And so those are a couple of the tips. The last one that I think is probably most important is getting back to GPS and communicating with your dive team prior to getting in the water. Again, it's always important to come up with a plan, talk through like, hey, here's the feature that we're looking for, or hey, this permanent marker that we installed has a temperature logger or something that will help the team kind of identify what you're searching for underwater. And then the last thing, and probably the most important thing in my mind, is making sure that when you're driving up to the location for the second resurvey, that you're relying on the GPS, assuming that you got a GPS point during the previous survey. And what we found that works really well is to drop floats. So like a little weight 2-pounder attached to some float at the surface, and you get as close as you can with the boat, working with the coxswain or the boat operator to get within 1 or 2 meters of that point. And it gets to a point where you're even telling the operator or whoever is dropping the float, drop it on this side of the boat versus that side of the boat, because 2 meters once you're underwater can be a lot. And so we've had really good luck over the last year or so, dropping the marker within 1 to 2 meters. And then when you get to the bottom, you're within 1 meter or 2 meters of the marker. So again, this gets back to your initial plot setup, but making sure you have great metadata, making sure that you're recording the GPS location. That'll really set you up for success, so you're not looking for a needle in a haystack. So a couple of things. We've had situations where the entire entire section of reef or the plot was completely gone, whether it be from a storm or some activity that came through and basically removed the plot. And so you have to kind of talk with your team prior to getting in the water to say, oh crap, what happens if things are completely destroyed or we don't find anything? And what we've been doing is using just a time limit. You know, you can't spend an entire dive, especially for research cruises where you have only a limited time at a site and you're trying to find things. It depends again on your application. If you need it, if you absolutely need to get back to that site, you can spend more time. But in our application, a lot of times we just don't have the luxury of spending multiple dives finding a site. But generally speaking, what we do is rely on those roadmaps in the metadata sheet. And if you have the depths and you're fairly confident that your GPS location is right, you can reset up the plot. And then what we typically do is try to make the survey a little bit bigger. So that way, if we're a little bit off, we're capturing what was there beforehand. And then hopefully when we get back and reconstruct the model, we can do a little bit more focused examination of the different corals or something in the plot to identify what's happened. In terms of the learning curve for us, and for me especially, prior to installing markers, we installed 2 markers, but we didn't identify which. They were both the same. And so you would get in the water and you would find one of the markers and then the other marker would be gone. And then you're looking around trying to find it. And so there were instances where we surveyed the wrong side of the plot because we thought we found marker number 2 versus marker number 1. So whatever marker pattern or style you come up with, make sure you come up with something that will be unique. If you're deploying 2 markers, you never want to have 2 markers that are exactly the same one because you can't rely on both of them being there. In a lot of cases, one will be missing or both will be missing. But if you do a good job installing the markers, just like establishing the GPS location on the first site, survey effort, if you do a good job trying to install the markers in something that's solid, that's something that's not going to move, you should be able to see the marker when you come back. And we've had fairly good luck, knock on wood, going back after 3, 4, 5 years finding the sites.